Welcome to my workshop. I'm Tina and this is Tina's workshop, and this is still Christmas in July, but let's see, we're on the last day of July and I still do have one more week coming because this one took a little longer than I had planned. So this is a tutorial for a vintage Christmas stocking. This is the stocking. It is an open source stocking now. It was printed in, I believe it was 1945, and it is open source. So at the end of the video, I'm going to put up each page of the pattern so you can do a screenshot and then you can do the pattern yourself. This is the one that was made for my son by Grandma Jean. She was my uncle's mom and she made my stocking when I was a baby. She made both of my boys' stockings and my husband, but this is the specific pattern we're going to be doing. And I absolutely love this one. Some of the ones that she had done, she would actually do an Angora in the beard, which made it so soft and fuzzy. And I have now done this pattern myself 3 times. And I now have a piece that she had started with her needles still in it, so that I know she was using the number 3 that the pattern calls for. I used the number 3 that the pattern calls for. She used straight needles. I used circulars. I just prefer circulars. I ended up using 2 circulars through most of it, just so I didn't have to worry about stitches coming off at the end of the needle, and I put my stoppers on it. I have a bamboo set and a metal set. I did find the metal one was much easier as I worked the stitches. That being said, this is the stocking I'm doing the tutorial on. Mine came out much larger, so I don't know if it was my tension or something else, but the last time I did it, it came out much larger too. But I had used larger needles that time because the first time I did it, it came out really small, but then I found out that there was parts that I had done wrong and I didn't have enough rows in the first one I did. So that's one of the reasons I'm doing this tutorial, because these vintage patterns can be really hard to understand sometimes. They don't put all the information in, they omit things because they figure you just know how to do it. And then there's some things that the wording is just a little hard to understand sometimes too. So this is done to the pattern. It has come out very large, which I don't mind. I like a large stocking. If you saw a couple weeks ago my crocheted stocking that I did, which I originally styled my first one off of this and then it's gone from there, but you can see it's a larger stocking. I like the large stockings, but this one is much larger. But the last time I made one for this same family, I got a really cute picture of the baby in the stocking because it was so big. So anyway, this is the stocking, my completed stocking from this tutorial. And I used for this one, I used from my stash and I bought 2. So what I ended up using, I have different brands here, but it's all worsted weight acrylic yarn. So I used the Red Heart Super Saver for the red in it, which was the colorway Cherry Red. I used Red Heart Super Saver for the green in the colorway Hunter Green. Those were the 2 I bought. This rest is from my stash. I used Caron 1 pound in the colorway White. For the face and the eyes. I had bought this one for this stocking. So it is the colorway Pale Peach from Big Twist. And then for the blue eyes, it was a little bit of light blue I had. I'm going to say it was probably either Big Twist or Red Heart, but it was just a little bit, because I mean, you use very, very, very little of that color. So you can definitely use something from your stash. So that is what I used. I used the number 3 needles that the pattern actually calls for, and stitch markers, row counters, scissors, needle, all the basic stuff. And now I'm going to let you watch the tutorial, and I hope you enjoy. This pattern is from 1945. As I said at the beginning, I will put these up on the screen at the end of the video so that you can do screenshots of each one of these pieces. So one of the first things we need to figure out is the name for the top. They come with the pattern itself comes with some very, very basic bits. And I'm just using some graph paper and marking out my stitch count. The child that this one is going to is from the same family from the past ones that I have on this paper. So that's going to make figuring out some of my letters easier because I already have them written out here. But I need to make sure that everything is going to line up and be even. You can do your name after if you want with a duplicate stitch. I am actually going to do color work and do it as I actually knit the stocking. I just prefer doing it that way. So I start doing a bit of math here. I am trying to figure out how many letters I have, how many spaces each letter is going to take up, and figure out where it's going to lie and which letter then needs to be at the center of what I'm doing. As I start figuring this out, I forget one very important thing, which I have to go back and fix later. You have space in between your words. But I forgot as I was figuring out my stitch count that I also needed to account for one space between each letter. So you've got multiple spaces between your words, but you have one space between each letter. So make sure as you are figuring out what you are putting on here that you account for those. Now, that being said, it does have the information for Merry Christmas. So if you don't want to put a name at the top and you just want to put Merry Christmas, that's already worked out for you in the pattern. So you can do that, or you can figure out your name or whoever you're making the stocking for. So I'm not someone who enjoys math. Sometimes I can get into the numbers, but sometimes it's also a necessity for what you're doing. So I just mark out each one of these. I'm marking out every 10 squares, and then I start marking out the words that I'm using, and you just fill in the little boxes because each one of your little squares accounts for one stitch. So I figured out my center point where I was starting from, but then that's when I figured out that I had forgotten to include the stitches in between, so I had to redo my math and move my center. So now I have my center, and I can work out from that center and fill in all of my words. And I'm sorry, my head got in the way. Trying to lean over so that I could see the little tiny squares. I ended up in front of the camera and didn't realize it. I think I did that a couple times, so I apologize. So once you have all this figured out, then we can get started on our stocking. So there is my chart. We are working from the top down. So you're actually going to be looking at your charts all upside down as you're working. So there's parts of this pattern that are rather confusing that when I first did it, I wrote out to make it more simple for me to understand on a piece of paper. And I will show that at the end too. But now, starting at the beginning, we are going to be casting on 90 stitches. They give you some basic information on these first couple pages, and then where it says leg pattern, that's where it's going to give you the first information of casting on 90 stitches. So you can cast on however you want. I like to do long tail cast on. And I picked out, I think it was a 16-inch circular needle. I was trying to pick one that was about the same length as the straight needles that Grandma Jean had been using. This is the one that she had started that says Merry Christmas. So this is what is in the chart, and this is the needles that she actually used. So I am using the same size needle, just in a circular instead of a straight needle. So mine is actually a little bit longer, which will give me more space, but I do find out later that it ends up being easier to work with two circulars while you're working the straight part. So you're working from that top edge going down. It's always hard doing the voiceover and remember exactly what you were thinking at the time that you were recording. But sometimes when there's other noises around, you need to do the voiceover instead. So cast on 90 stitches in your preferred method. Now, to make things a little bit easier when you're doing your words at the top, if you put a stitch marker after every 10 stitches, then as you are counting your chart for the top for your words, and if you remember, I made little marks at every 10 squares, so you can go back and you can look at where those are and know where you're putting your letters. It also helps as you're casting on, because if you lose count as you're casting on, you can go back and count in tens and then only have to count a few extra stitches. I learned this trick while back. I think it was Nitty Natty that I saw doing this, and I thought it was a great idea. I'm sure there's lots of other people who do it too. She was just the first one I saw that did it. Okay, 90 stitches with stitch markers in between for every 10. And so now you're going to start the pattern, each row of which consists of knitting across and purling back. The first 4 rows are in plain color, and pattern proper begins on row 5 where the stitch sequence is, and then it gives you the information for the Merry Christmas. If you're following a graph, you do your own. So each one of these rows is knitting across and purling back. So you're actually technically doing 2 rows for every one, which is where I messed up the first time I did this pattern. So you're doing, it says 4 rows in the plain color. So you're actually doing 8 rows. You're doing 4 knit rows and 4 purl rows. So you're going back and forth, working a knit row and a purl row for each row. So then as you start the chart, you'll be doing the same thing. Every row of the chart is getting done twice. Once across and once back. And that first row of knit is always so hard, getting into the cast on stitches, at least for me. So I purled, or I knit across and purled back. So I'm purling back. So this is the second row of my first row. And there's our first 2 rows done. Now I got to do that 3 more times. Row counters can be really helpful here. I click it on my knit row and know that I have to come back. So there's my first one. I did a full set. I got to do 4. So I do a knit row, a purl row, I click, and then I, click. So here's all 4 rows, 8 rows in total, complete all the way across. So now we are going to get ready and start our chart for either the Merry Christmas if you're doing that, or a personalized name. And I am doing the personalized name you watched me chart out earlier. So this is our whole chart, and this is what I am doing. So I'm starting with that name instead of the Merry Christmas. So I use a little piece of paper, stretches across. I've actually taken a piece of paper and folded it up, and I stick a paper clip on either side, and I follow my chart across. I've made the marks for every 10 and I've written what number it is. So as I'm working, I can figure out where each one is. Once you get down into the Santa pattern, it gets much easier. You end up having to take out your stitch markers because you're going to be doing decreases, but you're going to be following the row before. So you might look and be like, okay, I'm going 2 stitches before that stitch or 2 stitches after that stitch. So you don't need to count across the whole thing. It's your first rows that you tend to have to count across. And the numbers are very helpful when you're doing the words because you don't see this overall big picture as much. You're just seeing lots of little tiny lines because your whole letters don't fully show up until you get down to the very bottom. So use your stitch markers, your 10 by 10s. It does help a lot. And then remember, you are going across a knit row and coming back on a purl row, working the same chart row. So I've just picked up my green to start working my first stitches, and remember to twist your stitches to lessen the gaps. Not so much twist the stitches, twist the yarns in the back. I need to do a video just on that because it's hard to quickly explain. I just kind of automatically do it and sometimes realize I've forgotten to do it. So it takes me a few minutes as I'm getting into this, but I end up doing the two-handed method. So I'm throwing the green and I am doing continental with the white. Make sure as you create your floats that you pull out your stitches and make sure that your float is not going to be too tight because you don't want puckering. It would be better to have a float that's a little bit looser than a float that is too tight. So make sure and pay attention to your floats, especially when you're over a larger space, like right there. I want to tug that a little bit just to make sure that that float's not going to be too tight. Here's what it looks like after you've done those first 2 rows. So now you're going to want to continue working the word, whichever one it ends up being, and work those first diamond points. And you'll see a little notch that comes in on the side on your chart. Those are all decreases, so I will meet you back for the decreases. So now here it's explaining how your decreases go. You only only work your decreases on your knit round, or knit row, not on the purl row. So at the beginning of your knit row, you're going to knit 2 together, and at the end of that row, you're going to knit 2 together. And then you're going to purl back all the stitches. So you're working your chart on those decreases, but you're only doing the decrease itself on the knit row. So that little square in is just, we're getting rid of 1 stitch. So the first 2 stitches on your needle, you're going to knit them together, and then you're going to work across to the other side. Once you get back to the other end and you have 2 stitches remaining, you're going to knit those 2 stitches together. And then you're going to purl back, and you're not going to decrease any on your purl back row. So purl all the way across. Continue to work your chart, remembering that each one of those notches is a decrease. It's every 5 rows. Okay, I have the name finished. I have the points finished. This is how it looks when you're looking the correct way at it. So we have floats across the back, and the larger floats for the points I will show you later when we do the jingle bells, how you can minimize those floats if they bother you. So I thought I was at a good point to show you the ugly part of this stocking. So if your back looks like this, you're not doing anything wrong at all. You're starting to have bobbins. So I actually have 3 bobbins, but then like this piece, I just have a little bit more I'm using of it, so I haven't actually made a bobbin. I just kind of let it hang there. But you've got bobbins, you've got multiple strings going, and there's still 2 more colors that are going to come into this. This will be a very small piece you'll use for the eyes, and then there is also the peach coming in soon for the face. So that'll pull in another couple bobbins. But that being said, when you are working this part here, if you wanted to do bobbins on, that is this section here, if you wanted to do bobbins on this section, you could, or you can leave the floats. When we sew the jingle bells on, I will show you how we will bring this in some so they're not quite as long. And when you're doing this part up here, the floats, that looks fine. Though I will say this one was done by my Grandma Jean, who I got my stocking from when I was a baby. And this was one she had started, and I may have already shown you this in the video, I'm not sure, because I'm still recording things, but this was a top piece that she had done that just said Merry Christmas. And hers, you can see she actually took hers off, and she didn't even like tie it to another tie. She tied it around the different threads. And this would have been done many, many years ago. So there's not really a wrong way when you're doing this. And let's see, in this stocking, this was also one that she had made. So here, she didn't tie it, but she floated it. So there's your floats. And as you got down to the points, that area she did tie. So she doesn't have them coming across here. She just tied them off. So she probably did a bobbin and then tied it instead of coming all the way across. So she didn't weave ends in, she just tied the knots. This stocking is from 2001. No issues with it. But let's see, going down here further, there's more ties. So each one of these sections on the tree, she tied those. Let's see, on Santa's hat, she did the same thing. She's got lots of ties in it, where I have floats going right there. Though I am thinking a couple of these that I have longer, I might change off. Also, as I worked this section here, you see where these stitches are in tighter without floats? I will show you in a second how I did that. So there are different ways that you can do this. Here's down onto the face with the ties. You can see over years, it's, you know, they kind of are wearing in, though I think that one just kind of came undone, but there's another knot there. Okay, we're okay. There are ones that she made before I was born for my aunt and uncle, and they are still using those stockings. They are not lined, as you can see. I've never lined my stockings. She did not line her stockings. If you line them, you're restricted to the stretch of the cloth. And I like to shove them full. I mean, I pack these things full. I drop apples and oranges and candy bars and toys. Well, they're older now, so not so much toys. Well, sometimes we still stick toys in there. But with the knitting, you can really stretch them. If you line them with a cloth, you can't stretch them. And as far as this goes, like with the knots and stuff that she put into it, if I line it, those, it's not, I mean, you might not have something rub against it here, but you're still going to have whatever pull you might do on it here. So I don't really think that is a major thing. I did have somebody bring a stocking to me one time that had been made for them that actually did have some holes in different places that were in these smaller sections, and I repaired them for her. I didn't darn it. I followed the stitching so that it was brought back together. But anyway, I wanted you to see that part. I will show you what I am doing here and how we can achieve took me a while. I finally got to where I could combine my two forms of knitting, though most of you probably are either throwers or continental, but I have been combining the two. So I'm going to work over here to this tree, and then I'll show you what I did. Okay, so I do have, you can see a bit of a gap here, but that gap does kind of go away. And if you're twisting your yarn around itself, you're not supposed to end up with those gaps. But I have found that after I work some, if I have some, it doesn't show. But if you take your yarn, where's my other end? Sorry about that. Okay, so here's my next one I need is the green. So if you twist your yarns, then you're, oops, not the tail. If you twist your yarns and then work it, then you're not supposed to get that gap. So that's one thing. But with the way I've been knitting, I have not always been twisting it because I've got one over here and one over there. So now I am going to work over to my next color. I've got this laying funny here, so I'm tangling myself up. See, so now because I twisted that, that gap closed up. Okay, I need a, now you can see how I just pulled that out. Before I use the yarn, I'm going to give it a little tug. It's going to tighten it down. So what I was doing is making sure to create that wrap. But now if I wanted to work, which I'm not, but I'm going to show you, if I wanted to work that same color again and I went in front of the yarn this time, and then if I do another stitch and I go behind that yarn, each time I do that, I'm locking those stitches in right there. And that's what I did in that other section so that I didn't have a float. Now, I need to pick those two stitches back out because they need to be green. Yep. Yep. Okay, so now we're picking this red up, and I've got everything tangled. It's the way I have it laying on the table. I normally have my yarn laying out in front of me, but trying to get it on the table so I can record can make it tricky. Okay, so my next one, going over, so my next one's red. So if I cross over that green, then I'm going to bring my two colors together. I can drop that green now, and if I can get this all untangled, there we go. I'll bring my red over and keep working across the row. So that is just one way that you can minimize the floats, and you can do it coming back to, you can use more bobbins, you can cut and tie knots. It is totally up to you. I've always had trouble doing the knots because I was raised to never put knots in your yarn work. You were supposed to weave your ends in. Though I have been seeing benefits of knots. And I do not think it's wrong to put a knot. A lot of times if I use knots, I like to, sorry, had to get that over. If I use knots, I like to put the knot in and then weave the end in a little bit just so that it hides the tail still, so the tail's not sticking out. But that being said, there's multiple different ways you can do that. We are going to keep working our chart, working across one and back. Oh, and there's one thing else that I did here. On this spot right here, I missed my color change, and I didn't notice it until I was way down here. I didn't want to pull it all back out. There's only one stitch that's actually missing there, So I just left it knowing I could come back with the yarn later and I can do a duplicate stitch over those stitches and be able to work those ones right back in without having to have the time to tear all that back out. So I can just work the duplicate stitches right over it and then weave in that end and don't have to worry about it. So I'll meet you back when we get down to the end of the chart. Okay, here's our completed leg, all done. Looks amazing. So now we just need to do a lot of weaving in of ends and put our jingle bells on. This is the part that I dislike the most, is weaving in the ends, but you have to do it. There are different areas that I did decide to knot before weaving the end in to pull those two stitches together so that I didn't take any chance of a gap. So I just need to finish weaving in all those ends now and put the jingle bells on. So got 6 little gold jingle bells here. We're gonna put them on. You just need to make sure and have a needle that is going to go all the way through your bell. So this one will go all the way through. The eye of this needle is a little tighter than most of your yarn needles, so it is a little bit trickier to get the yarn threaded. We're going to use white. You could use white or red because you're at this point where the white and red joins. I'm using white. Okay, so we're just going to weave our end in, and the nice thing about where the color we've done our color work is we have extra loops, which does make it a little bit easier when it comes to doing the weave in. And I am actually splitting some of these threads. I have a nice sharp needle and I'm splitting some of the threads so that I know it's going to hold in tight. And I put my thumb on it. It helps the yarn to pull through, and once you have a loop going too, it also helps to keep from having a loop get tangled. So I've split my threads, something that I was always told not to do, but I'm splitting the threads so that they stay in nice and tight. See the thumb there keeps that from going into a big loop. Okay, so we've got that in, it's nice and tight. So we're going to come up on one side of the point there. And then run it through one of the bells. Pull the yarn all the way down and through. So you get right up near there. And then I'm going 2 over so it's the other side of the point. And that'll give it a little more stability than going over just one. So thumb in the loop, hold the bell, get it nice and snug. So now how we deal with the floats is we're going to bring, I'm just securing in the bell so that I don't pull the yarn as I do the rest of this. So we're going to secure these floats now, and we're going to run the needle back up the point. There's no point in stopping with each one of these bells and weaving ends in. It's a lot more work, and if we're going to go to that much work, we might as well just do this way, and then we are able to secure those floats. So I come up, make sure I'm underneath all those floats, do a little bit of a weave over to the center of where the floats are located, which is why the white is nice in this case, because we're running along the white. If you did the red yarn, you would just have to go into the lower point where the red yarn's at. Then I'm going to pick up the floats with my finger, put the needle underneath it, come back over, and continue along the row. Give it a little pull. It's going to pull up those floats, so now they don't have such a large space, but it's still not puckering because we left the floats loose enough that we can do this. So now we will just run the yarn back down to the next point and add on our next jingle bell, and we will do this all the way across. There is something so satisfying about having your ends all woven in, even though they're a pain in the butt to do. So I have all my long floats tied. I have a spot here where I tied them, and another spot here. And everything else is all woven in. And we have the whole leg done. So now you can see this is the front with the tree and the back with the Santa. So now at this part is when this pattern gets a little bit confusing, because it is actually now going to be like this. This section here is where the heel goes. So you can see that on this one. So your heel is on the back side where the seam is. And in the pattern, you put this section on one needle, this section on another needle, and then this section on a third needle. And you work the heel in two sections. And then you can see on this one how it's been seamed up all the way through to the toe. Everything was worked flat and then seamed. For me, that just feels a little bit more confusing, and figuring out the heel turn and everything and working that flat. But it does say at the end of the pattern, in general directions, they give you a couple different things you can do. And this one says heel, bottom of foot, and toe are knitted in the manner of a plain stocking or sock, where the instep is a plain color and the same color as the foot. This part of the stocking may be knitted round and round as in a plain sock. So you can work that in the round. And the other ones I've done on this pattern, I think that's how I did it, was in the round, because like I said, I don't like this idea here. So you can either work this in this separated piece, this separated manner, or you can work it in the round. I'm going to work it in the round. So I'm going to put these stitches on one needle and these stitches on one needle and work it like you would a normal sock. Work this heel flap, gusset, and everything else just as you would a regular sock on the 2 needles as opposed to 3. So another thing is with these vintage patterns, some things get a little confusing. So after the first time I did this, I looked at this, I wrote things down so that it was easier for myself to understand. So when I hold everything up for you to be able to do a screenshot, I will hold that one up too. And that is what I am going to work off of, is this. They're basically the same, it's just I wrote it so that the words made more sense for me to understand when I went back to do it again. So I am going to take and put my stitches onto 2 sets of needles, and I will be right back. Okay, so I have my stitches on 2 needles now. So these are the ones that are going to work the foot, and they're just going to be left for right now. So there's 36 stitches on there, and I put my stoppers on there so that they don't fall off. And then you picked up 18 on each side, making 36 across here for the heel. And we are just going to work back like we've been doing, knitting and purling for 3 inches. Once we get to 3 inches, we're going to purl back only 19 stitches because we are going to start our heel turn there. So I'm going to start here. I have cut the yarn here, and I left a long enough tail so that I can seam up that seam later. So I'm picking up a new yarn here, and we are going to knit across this row. When you get to the center, you need to pay attention because you do have these 2 separate pieces here, and you want to make sure that you keep your tension between these 2. So that you don't have a gap later. So I'm holding my finger on these stitches to keep from pulling away. So we're going to finish knitting across this row. Okay, so we're at the end of that row. We're going to turn it over. We are going to purl back, and some things have been learned since this pattern was made. So if you want to do like you would normally do in your socks and slip that first stitch on each row so that you have that extra little bump to find when you're picking up stitches, you can do that, though it will not say that in this pattern. So I slipped that one and I'm going to purl across. And I'm just going to keep doing this for 3 inches, and I will meet you back there. Okay, so when you cut your tail, make sure you leave enough so that you can close this up later. Now you can either continue to work this in red, or you can switch if you want a different colored heel. So you can have your heel and toe white, or in the pattern itself, in that picture it shows it with the red heel and then the white toe. So you can do it either way. I am going to switch mine and do the white heel. So then once we go to pick up the gusset stitches, that's when we'll switch back to the red. So I'm going to start off here with the white on a knit row. And we are going to, why did I do that? That's where I need it. We are going to knit across. And when we get to the center, we want to make sure we keep our tension tight so that those 2 sides stay together. If you put your finger on your stitches here each time, so you're kind of holding them, then when you go to grab your next stitch, you can keep your tension and not pull it apart. So here's the center. Oop, I almost pulled those stitches right off. Okay, center stitch. So now we need to make sure and keep it tight right here on that next one, and continue to work across. Now when you work a regular sock, something that they just probably hadn't learned back when this pattern was made, when you work a regular sock, a lot of times you slip that first stitch as you work your heel flap, which gives you that extra little bump that makes it easier when you are picking up your stitches for your gusset, which you can actually, if you want to, purl. Always make sure your last stitch is purled. So you would just purl this stitch. So whenever you come to the end, you would purl it, and then you turn your work. And we're going to purl back. My yarn is caught around my stocking. Hold on. There we go. So we're going to purl back, but if you slip that first stitch and then purl the rest of the way. So each row, if you slip the first one and purl the last one, that will give you an easier spot to find when you're picking up your gusset stitches. You do not have to do that. If you want to just work it in your straight knit and purl, that is fine too. So we're going to continue working like this, doing a knit row and a purl row for 3 stitches. For 3 inches. When we get to the end, we're going to only purl back 19 stitches so that we can start our heel turn. And I will meet you back there. Okay, so I have worked 3 inches, maybe a touch more, but I'd rather have a little bit more than not enough. And I am now on a purl row. So we are going to start our heel turn now. So we're going to work back 19 stitches. my yarn all in the right direction here for me. So I'm slipping that first one like I've been doing, and purl 19 total. Okay, so that's 19 stitches. We're going to knit 2 together, or not knit, I'm sorry, purl 2 together and purl 1, and then we're going to turn. Okay, so now we're going to knit back 6 stitches. And we're going to, this time, knit 2 together and knit 1. Now we're going to turn our work again. And we're going to I always have the worst time when I start my first purl. There we go. Yep. Okay. Now we're going to purl 8. We're going to purl 2 together and purl 1 and turn. Now we're going to knit 10 . We're going to knit 2 together and knit 1. And we're going to keep doing this, increasing that number of how many we're knitting or purling by 2 in each row. So the next one, we just did 10, so the next one we're going to purl 12, purl 2 together, purl 1, and then we will knit 14, knit 2 together, knit 1, and we're going to keep doing that, increasing until you've worked all 36 stitches across, which will no longer be 36 stitches because we will have decreased on each row. But as soon as you've worked all of them back, I will join you there. Here is our turned heel, all done. So I am down to 25 stitches now on this needle. There's still 36 on this needle back here, and we have to pick up our stitches along the sides. So you can see here where we did that slip and the purl. See how we've created these little bumps? So now as we pick up those stitches, we can go right into each one of these. We know right where to go to pick up our stitches. Makes it really easy to find them. Okay, so now you can, if you've been working all in red, then you're going to stay with what you are. If you've been working in a separate color for the heel, you're going to change that now. So I am going to clip this yarn and bring in my next color. So we'll work across all the stitches on the heel, and it looks like when I went by that one earlier, I messed up my stitch, so now that should be straight. Okay, all the way across, picking or working the stitches on this needle. Yep. Okay, all the way to the end. Now we're going to pick up the stitches along the side here. Some people find it easier to throw when they're doing this. I find it just as easy for myself to just do the continental the way I'm normally doing it. So I'm going to go under both of those and pull up a loop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I got 10 out of that. And then I'm going to pick up this bar here, and I'm actually going to go to the second one. I've done that a few times because where it's like really big and loose, I felt like if I got to the second one and then under both of those, I just bring it in a little tighter. So that will give us an extra 11 stitches here. And I am going to put a marker here. I'm actually going to put this one. And now we're going to work across our other set of stitches. Get them all worked back up on the needle so I can grab them. Okay, and work across the 36 stitches on this needle. Okay, we're to the end of that one. I'm going to put another marker here. And then we're going to pick up that needle out of my way. Okay, we're going to pick up here underneath that second bar again and pick up our stitches along here, and hopefully we will pick up 10 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, oop, and 10. And we are back to that needle. Now, this needle I'm using is really long and this one is shorter. So I'm going to switch needles as I work this next row. But if your needle is not as long as mine, then you won't have to do this part. So now as we start working our next rounds, we're going to decrease for the gusset. Unlike a typical sock, when you're doing your gusset row, oh, I have that first stitch twisted. When you're doing your gusset row on a sock, you do a decrease row and then you do a knit row. But on this, we're decreasing on every round. So we are going to knit around until we get to our first marker. Now you can also do this on double pointed needles. You could do your magic loop. You do this however you want. I think my other needle size-wise is going to be fine doing this until I get to the toe. And I like to be able to just continuously work in that round without having to switch needles. So I plan to work with the circulars. My needle's getting twisted here. There we go. That first row is always a little awkward as you're getting everything set up to work it. Okay, there is our marker, and we're stopping through we're going to stop three stitches or 2 stitches. Yeah, 2 stitches before. This is where these old patterns confuse you, that all they do is they tell you to decrease by 2 stitches every round. That's all they tell you. They don't tell you how to do it. Which is why I wrote up that other paper, because when I first was doing this a number of years ago, I didn't know how to do that. So I had to look up videos and stuff to figure it out, and then I wrote it out so I would remember. Okay, so on this side we are going to knit 2 together. And then we're going to move our marker. And knit across the instep. Sorry, crinkly noise. My stocking was getting twisted. We're now to the other marker. We're going to move the marker, and then we're going to do a slip knit. So you can either slip the two and knit them, or I learned this trick from somebody else and I like it because I find it easier. Instead of slipping these two over here and then trying to get back in to knit them, if you go into the back of the stitch and then knit it. So you're knitting the two together in the back. It does the same as the slip knit, so you can see the direction. It puts the stitches right there. You see that? So I just find that easier. So I've started doing that now when I'm doing a slip knit. And finish knitting this round. Get that needle out of my way. So now all those stitches should sit nicely on that set of needles I have. So you're going to continue working like this. So there's where our heel turn is and our instep, and we're going to keep working doing those decreases here around each round until we have this number back to 36. So once that is back to 36 and we have 36 on each one, then we're going to start just working in the round without any decreasing. So I will meet you back there. I'm also going to, while I have this open and easy to get to, I'm going to go ahead and weave in these ends so I don't have to worry about them later, and then they don't get in my way as I'm working. So I will see you back after I'm done with my decreases. The gusset is done. So there's the gusset decrease here, and on this side. Now we're just going to keep working in the round until our foot measures 8 inches from the end of the heel. So we want 8 inches of, well, gusset and straight rows. So once you get to 8 inches, you can cut your yarn, and I'll meet you back up there. well, cut your yarn if you're changing colors on your toe, which I am, and I will meet you back there and we will work the toe. Okay, so I have worked my 6 inches, of my foot, and now it's time to work the toe. I went ahead and put my stitches back onto 2 needles, so as I decreased, I didn't have to worry about doing it later. We are actually going to work part of the decrease before we switch to the white. And this is another part where these old patterns don't always make sense. So it says, now start decreasing to shape toe as follows. Decrease 4 stitches on the next row. Then, these being the end stitches on the instep needle, and the stitches next to these, 1 on each underfoot needle. Knit 4 rows plain, then 1 row decreasing 4 stitches as before. 3 rows plain, 1 decreasing, 3 plain, 1 decreasing, 2 plain, 1 decreasing, 2 plain, 1 decreasing, 1 plain, 1 decreasing. Then decrease every row until only 16 stitches remain. 8 on the instep needle and 4 on each of the underfoot needles. That's if we were working the 2 needles on the other side if we still had it open. The shift to white yarn for the toe may be carried out at any point, or the entire foot may be made red. We suggest shifting to the white at the point of reaching the above sequence of 2 rows plain, 1 decreasing, etc., to achieve the effect indicated in the stocking illustration. Weave toe as follows, and then it tells you how to basically do like the Kitchener stitch. But that is the instructions on the toe. Decrease 4, do plain rows. So, that being said, I do my decreases the same way that we would do on a sock, since this just is a great big sock. So the first one we're decreasing, and then we're going to work four rows plain. So on the first part, when you're on, how do I say it? I guess if you're looking at this here where it joins, when you're on that left side, we do a slip slip knit. When you're on the right side, you do the knit two together, if that makes sense. So on this one here, we're going to do the slip slip knit, which I do by knitting into the back. And then knit across until we reach 2 stitches before the end. Okay, so we have 2 stitches left. We're going to knit these 2 together. We're going to go to the next needle. And we're going to do that again, except, yeah, no. I was thinking of something else. Okay. So on this first one, which again is on the left, if you're looking at it this way, you're going to do that slip, slip, knit. Remembering to keep your tension tight so you don't have a gap here. And then again, knit to the end. Two stitches left, and you're going to knit those 2 together. So now we did 1 set of decreasing 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches. Now we're going to work 4 rows just plain around. Then we'll do another decrease just like we just did and work another set of rows to what the pattern is. So that's all in the pattern. And just keep following that, and I will meet you back when we get to the 2 plain, which is where we change colors. I am down to where I'm going to start my first 2 row decrease, or not decrease, 2 rows. I just did a decrease row, so now I'm doing 2 rows plain. So at this point I am adding in my white yarn, and then I will continue the decreasing down to the 16 stitches. 16 stitches. Okay, I'm down to my first set of 2 rows plain. I just cut my red yarn. I'm going to pick up my white and start working the white on the toe until I get down to the point of 16 stitches total. So if you're working 2 needles like I am, you will have 8 stitches on each needle. And once we get to that point, then we will Kitchener stitch the toe closed. So I'm going to continue working with my white to finish off my toe, and I will meet you back when there is 16 stitches left. We are now down to 16 stitches left, so we've got 8 on each needle. We are going to cut our yarn, thread our yarn needle, and Kitchener stitch these off of here. Okay, so we're going to first do our setup. We're going to purl, or run the needle through like we're purling, and then through the back loop like we're knitting. So now our stitches are set up. So now we're going to do a four stitch repeat. So we're going to run through the first one as if to knit and pull that loop off, and then run through the back loop on that front needle as if to purl. Now we're going to run through the back one as if to purl and take that one off, and then run through the back one as if to knit and leave it on. And then through the front one as if to knit, pulling it off, and through the front one again as if to purl, leaving it on. The back one as if to purl, taking it off, and the back one as if to knit, leaving it on. So we're going to continue like that all the way across. So basically like a knit, purl, purl, knit. Front one comes off, second one stays on. You can see how the toe is coming. Make sure you don't loop your yarn over your needle, creating another stitch. Oh. Okay, we're down to 4 left. Knit and off. Purl, stay on. Purl and off. Knit, stay on. Now, there's different ways of doing this last, and I am just going to do the basic way just because for this it's going to be easier to show you that. So we're just going to finish it off with working that one as if to knit, this one as if to purl, which will leave it like this. So now this is sticking up a little bit here, so we just want to pull that down inside the stocking. And since our back is still open, it's going to be a lot easier to get up into there. So we'll pull that right down into the stocking. So now we have our toe finished off. We'll weave our ends in inside. Clip that tail. Our toe is now complete. So now all that is left, we need to stitch this back up and we need to make a little hanger and we'll be done. So let's do this part. Now you could go to the inside of the stocking and stitch it, or you can do it from the outside, trying to somewhat hide your stitches. We have a little bit of a loop here. That's probably because we've been unintentionally tugging on it as we've been working. So I am going to start, and I'm going to back up myself. Let's see, bring this in a little more for you again. I'm going to loop right in here and then come across to here so that we can hide this, and I'm going to pick up right here between these two. And then we're going to keep doing this along the way. So I'm picking up that bar right there. I know sewing is one thing that some people dislike the most about a project. I actually don't mind it too much. I'd rather do this than weaving in ends. I kind of like this because you see the whole thing coming together. So we're just going to keep picking up the bars and working our way up the whole length of this. But stick your fingers underneath as you do that to pull this out, because remember where we've decreased along the way, so some of this is going to end up curling over more. So you want to make sure you uncurl it so you get right along the edge so that we get a nice shape when we're done. And when we get up to the white, we will use that white tail we had at the top. And you can see how our seam is hiding. Now I'm to the white, and I'm using that tail that I had. I'm just going to finish sewing this up. I'm going to go from the top down, just because that's where my yarn's at. If you don't like the idea of doing that, you could cut that and weave that end in and then just pick it up here at the base, but I'm just gonna line that up and do the same thing, picking up the bars. You can do that kind of loosely as you go, and then periodically give your yarn a little tug and it'll pull it. Don't go too far though, because then it's just too hard to give it a tug, but I usually do about every 5 or 6 stitches and give it a little tug. yarn to the back. And then you can weave in those ends. Now the only thing left is our hanger. There's our whole back stitched up. So there's a couple different ways you could go about the hanger, because it does not actually tell you, the pattern does not actually give you any instructions on the hanger. It gives you information on blocking it and putting the bells on, sewing it, but it doesn't tell you anything about the hanger. This one that my Grandma Jean did, she looks like she did a chain and then single crocheted around that chain. You could do an I-cord. When I do these ones for my crocheted ones, I do a single crochet of 14, a chain of 14, and then single crochet back, and then I just loop that and stick that on. So you could do it whatever is more comfortable for you. I am thinking that I might just do a crochet hang tab, just because it's the simplest, and then you just attach it right here, stitch it down, and then you're done. Well, we got it done. So this still needs to be blocked. You can, if you don't want to block them, obviously you don't have to, but it will straighten some of this out, fix some of your puckering you might have. But here is your stocking. Very big, generous stocking. What's funny is looking at the one that Grandma Jean made for my son, and she followed this exact same pattern, same needles. I know because I have this one that she had started that has her needles in it. So she used the same size needles. Her tension might just be a lot tighter than mine, but you can see the difference in the size. It's a lot different in size. So I don't know, yours, if you have a tighter tension, yours might come out more like this one, or it might come out more like mine. But it's still, it's a fun stocking. It is a vintage pattern, and I don't know, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure and click like, click subscribe if you'd like to see more, do all those YouTube-y things. I am going to put the pattern on the screen, and I'm going to put it sideways so that we can fill the space so that you get a better image on the pattern. So I will put each one up for 5-10 seconds so that you can have time to take a screenshot of each one of the pieces. And if you make one, make sure and tag me on Instagram, Tina's Workshop _YT. Information is all down below. I'd love to see what you do, and we will see you all again soon. Bye.